Australia, the continent, the country. It's the only of which the indigenous people stayed nomadic. It was the last continent to be explored and colonized, the home of unique animals. But there is so much more to it. Let us discover the history of Australia. Isolation, thousands of miles of oceans, salty, impenetrable waters from east and west, from time immemorial, separate Australia from the other continents. However, the Ice Age and lowered sea levels make migrations possible. The continent becomes populated by the Aboriginals. Over the next thousands of years, these people create social structures that separate into many different languages. The indigenous population divides into almost 500 regional groups that until the time of European colonization will use over 200 different languages. Among the Aborigines, no political identity evolves. Their perception of the world, based on mythology, is grounded in a concept called the dreaming, or Terra, which says that everything that lives is interrelated, one system created by spiritual beings. This concept leads to accepting the world as it is, and sets the principal goal to keep it stable. There's no centralization of power, and respect is gained through perfect knowledge of rituals and ceremonies, passing on legends, songs, and traditions. Over the thousands of years, Aborigines, receiving the blessings of nature from their mythical ancestors with the help of rituals, keep their land stable and ensure the process of rebirth for nature. However, the outskirts of the continent are witnessing increasingly often encounters with aliens. Makassar people are venturing farther into the lands of the northern Aborigines. These encounters, however, never reach beyond the north. For centuries, rumors and legends are spreading among the traders about the Terra Australis Incognita, unknown southern land. For Europeans, this is only a tale. However, in the middle of the 16th century, a series of world maps are created, so-called the Maps from Dieppe, documenting the latest Portuguese explorations. A mysterious land is found, like Grand Java. A few centuries later, the map will be considered by some as the evidence of discovering Australia by the Portuguese. However, the Portuguese are not the only Europeans searching for new lands. The competition is on. Growing power in America, Spain is also interested in the new acquisitions. Spaniards are looking to explore new areas, however, only reach the Solomon Islands and modern-day Vanuatu. Soon after, a Dutch trader, Willem Janszoon, sets sail from the Dutch East Indies to search for new land. According to his plan, he arrives at the now-known destination and names it Keer-Weer. As it turns out later on, it's Australia, modern-day Cape York. Since that moment, the sea route is frequented by the Dutch ships, which sometimes sailing too far away are sighting the coast of Terra Australis. Continuous expeditions explore larger parts of the continent. Abel Tasman in 1642, sailing in the southern direction, discovers an island, which later on will be named Tasmania. And his second voyage, sailing around the northern parts of the continent, gives it the name, the New Holland. The Dutch bring Terra Australis to the world maps. A word about the Dutch travels reaches England. Ongoing sea rivalry between the Amsterdam and London determines the English to take a closer look at the latest explorations. In the 1688, Willem Janszoon sets out around the New Holland, returns and convinces the Admiralty to support expedition. In the coming decades, his actions stimulate interest about these lands among the British public opinion. Trade seems attractive, profitability convinces the Admiralty for further explorations. In 1768, HMS Bark the Endeavour, under the command of Captain James Cook, sail from England. In the year 1770, arrives at the coast of New Holland and disembarks in several spots, including Botany Bay and Possession Island, and gives that land a new name, New South Wales. Cook's expedition spreads the idea to colonize the new land, and with losing the 13 colonies, the idea grows stronger. During that time, many people in Britain live in poverty, and the penalty for theft is high. Choosing between hunger and thievery, many are choosing the theft and simultaneously overpopulate the local prisons. Officially, to reduce the criminal population and unofficially to make use of the human resources, British government sends out an expedition to create a penal colony and bridgehead for further British colonization. In 1788, under the patronage of Lord Sydney, an expedition arrives at Botany Bay under the command of Arthur Phillip, carrying 730 convicts and 250 free men plus the crew. However, unable to locate an appropriate location to disembark, the fleet sails north, discovers a large bay, founds a settlement, and names it after the patron of the expedition, Sydney. Soon afterward, George Vancouver reaches West Australia and claims it for the British Crown. The first decades are tough. The penal colony is under the military authority. Disease and starvation decimate the population, replaced by new colonists and convicts. British push forward, and in 1827, Edmund Lockyer founds Albany in modern-day Western Australia. Britain claims the entire continent. Until the 1830, about 58,000 convicts are brought to Australia, including 8,000 women. Upon arrival, prisoners are hired or assigned to work in a colony. In the following decades, this activity will be considered by some as a hidden form of slavery. Mostly, however, fair conditions make it possible for convicts to integrate and become free men. Along the increase of the free people, resistance grows. People do not want the penal status of the land. Finally, the British Parliament, convinced, agrees to stop sending convicts to some of the colonies. Since 1840, sending criminals will be gradually reduced until the 10th of January 1868, when the last shipment of convicts will reach the Western Australia. In total, it's estimated that between the 1788 and 1868, about 164,000 of prisoners will be brought to Australia. Only a small percentage of modern-day Australians directly relate to the convicts. Whaling evolves, and bringing ship starts wool production. In the year 1850, London grants self-government to 4 colonies, which write down constitutions and create local parliamentary democracies. Immigration speeds up. In 1820, the population equals about 60,000 people, to reach 450,000 in 1851, to touch, during a gold rush, over 1,050,000 people just 10 years later. The gold rush is on, and with it, conflict arises between the officials and newly wealthy. Miners do not want to pay new taxes. Comes the riots, and in December of 1854, in Eureka, the fight between soldiers and the protesters. It is one of handful conflict escalations in the history of Australia. With finding natural resources, mining dynamically evolves. In 1850 and 53, universities of Sydney and Melbourne are founded. Many Chinese workers immigrate to Australia. Substantial migrations lead to new government scheme at the end of the century, banning diverse immigration. The policy is called White Australia. Locally, Aborigines were oppressed. At the beginning of colonization, Aborigines, not knowing the concept of property, do not know what treaties with the Europeans can bring. They are bringing disease, decimating Aborigines, and also the conquest of the natives out from their homelands. Until the 1967, Aborigines will not be considered as equal inhabitants and citizens of their native land. Later historians will name the policy towards the Aborigines genocide. In the second half of the 19th century, among the population, new ideas of a federation are being voiced out. Until the 1901, the population equals 3,370,000 people. Trade and mining brings affluence, and along with it, railroads and telegraph networks laid. The continent is penetrated deep into the outback. British self-government concessions and a threat of European powers bring federation to the negotiating table. Australians want self-reliance. On the 1st of January 1901, a Dominion of Commonwealth of Australia is proclaimed. Sir Edmund Burton becomes the first Prime Minister. However, among the population, there's hardly any separate identity. Along with the outbreak of the First World War, thousands of young people on a distant continent are at war which they do not understand. In the year 1915, the British command decides to launch a naval attack on Turkey. Anzac soldiers are dying in hopeless combat. Young men fall to their deaths, and the British command orders suicidal attacks on the enemy lines. Thousands of dead and wounded shock public opinion and make them realize the difference between the British and Australian interests. The war comes to an end, and with the peace arrangements, Australia receives the League of Nations mandate over the former German colonies in the Pacific, which will stay under its control until 1975. The Second World War breaks out. Like 2 decades earlier, Australia joins war along with Britain. However, the British are being defeated in the Far East. Japan quickly takes new territories. Hong Kong falls. Singapore falls. Australia is under threat. The United Kingdom, put on the defensive in Europe, cannot provide support. A turning point occurs. Anzac asks the United States for protection. Along with its victories, the US takes the opportunity to pull Australia and New Zealand under its influence. The war in Europe ends, and soon after, also on the Pacific, the New World Order is brought to life. After the war, Australia creates a scheme to take in the new immigrants. Over the next 30 years, around 2 million people from Europe immigrate to Australia. Australia is a member of the United Nations and in an alliance with the United States. According to its obligations, supports the UN troops in Korea and then supports the US during the Vietnam War. Liberation from the British influence continues, but in Australia, there are still laws that make it a burden to London in many ways. Australia wants to change its immigration laws, however, it meets resistance. British Governor-General meddles in the dispute. He uses his power to disband the democratically elected government. A new administration is formed. Public opinion does not agree with that. The following years will lead to debates and pressures to finally, in 1986, convince the British Parliament to legislate the Australia Act, which formally makes it impossible for Australian courts to appeal to London, in fact, making Australia fully independent.